Welcome everyone. Ben and I are very excited and eager for this session, as we are most community calls. Today we'll be talking about land legacies, but before we begin, I wanted to give two announcements which are related to our upcoming community calls. In 2 weeks, we'll have a Connect and Collaborate session, which is really exciting. We have a lot of new participants in the Retreat Center collaboration, those who are new to community calls. I see some new faces today. Welcome. We're going to connect formally, introduce ourselves again, and see where our threads connect and if there's any potential collaborations across retreat centers and allied organizations. And then our first August community call I'm very, very excited for, which is with Sally Hare, who's on the call. We're going to do a little Heal the Healer or heart-centered community call, a circle of trust. What does it look like to connect soul and role in uncertain times? So I will mention those again at the end, but please save the dates, July 27th and August 10th. I think I'm also designated timekeeper of this session. We have a lot to fill in this 90 minutes together. So I'll just be nodding in the chat or verbally about moving us along. And Ben, I think we'll go through the flow of the day. Ben?
Just making some folks co-hosts here who might be sharing their screen when they present here in a minute. Okay, here I need to click here. There we go. We have quite an array of voices here that have been involved in our Land Legacies conversations, going back to maybe January or February or even late last year. So some of those conversations started by just thinking about land and an article that we read about the Catholic Church land mapping and saying, okay, if the Catholic Church has all this land and it's being used in all these different ways, what is the impact of that land itself? Just thinking about the land, the ecosystem, the environment. And there's an organization called Good Lands that's actually just doing mapping. That's what they're focusing on. Where is this land and what could it be used for? Or what is it being used for?
Michael's using it.
And from that conversation, we were kind of perked up to think about, okay, we're a network of retreat centers. Many of us are land-based organizations. We're all doing different things with our land. We all have different relationships with our land, but what might we have in common? And as we kind of expand into a group conversation, what might we be able to learn from each other? What changes could we make to protect land from development, particularly in this kind of chaotic time of change and transformation across the sector? And also, what is the role of land in retreat? Retreat, for a long time, I think most of us assumed was dependent on space, place, land, coming to that sacred thin place. That's the language that we often use. And being forced to do retreats online, it's like, well, we can do it online. What's the value of the land itself? And there are a lot of voices in this room that have shared the work that they've been doing for years related to their land. So at Flourishing Together, our virtual retreat in May, we invited 4 or 5 different voices to speak on the work that they had been doing most recently. So there's videos of that available if you want to learn more about those conversations. I wrote a blog post synthesizing some other conversations that I've been having. And then I reached out to several leaders that I've been meeting in the past few months who I know are doing interesting things at their centers, to ask them to speak a little today on other ways that we can think about land, the value of land, caretaking, stewardship, and that transition from just being an owner or running programming on the land to the land being a third facilitator. Actually, there's a relationship, and that mutuality and interdependence being a part of the way we think about land. So we have 4 speakers today: Dr. Myra Miller from the Nature Studies Conservatory, Jean Richardson from Kirkridge Retreat and Study Center, Tom Powell from Carolyn Furnace Lutheran Camp and Retreat Center, and Gregg Osofsky from the Watershed Center. So we're going to go in that order, about 10 minutes each, and hear from some of these fellow retreat center leaders. Justine and I will be taking some notes. What I do want to invite you to do is put some questions in the chat as we go, so that we have kind of a sense of what we'd like to discuss after the presentations are over. So maybe you could just say a question for Myra or a question for Jean, so that we know kind of threads we want to pick back up after these presentations are over, because it's going to go fast, and I know there's a lot of material here. I've seen some PowerPoints and I'm excited. So let's start by inviting Dr. Myra to go ahead and speak, unless there are other questions here. Do we have other questions? Dr. Myra, over to you.
First, I have to come off of mute. And then I'm going to, okay, so it's saying that I'm not able to screen share.
Should be good now.
Alrighty, so good morning for those who are on the Pacific Coast, and good afternoon for those who are central to Eastern Coast. My name is Dr. Myra Miller, and I am the founder and spiritual director of the Nature Studies Conservatory. One of our quotes that kind of wrap everything up in one sentence, we seek not only to minimize our ecological footprint, but to change our relationship with the earth and our environment. So the Nature Studies Conservatory is dedicated to altruistic, social, environmental activism, stewardship, and community partnership for the healing of humanity and the planet. And just a little bit about us. We offered sacred space, support community for holistic health and well-being, healing and restoration of relationship and personal collective development. And so we have a base of contemplative studies, really to develop the inner relationship and knowledge of self, higher self. And really, as Ben had mentioned, that nature, the land itself is part of that process of healing and growth and development. We provide online and soon to be on-site options to really contribute to this relationship, the healing, growth, development, balancing for and renewal. And then for this whole context of the altruistic, the evolution of humanity, the sustainability, the regenerativeness of our communities, and the preservation of the earth. So the restoration of the earth. So just a little background about what we do. We have several different programs and services that we, and resources that are educational based that we offer. Our work is really within the Healing Center, and the Healing Center have the Educational Institute. So one of our projects, the Harmony Project, really creates safe space to heal the micro and macroaggressions and trauma that contribute to acts of oppression, systemic racism, social economic disparity, and violence. And then we also have a 3-part course that is continuing to evolve, Healing from Oppression, BIPOC Healing from Oppression. This really addresses personal, professional development, and it is an integration of research, ancestral indigenous wisdoms, and contemplative studies to heal trauma, and then again, focusing on sustainability, regenerative, and social economic restoration. Our COS project includes community land trust, and that is what I'm going to be talking more about, the whole process of learning on the ground and really connecting with a lot of people to not just about partnerships, but relationships, because this whole context of work really is integrative in us working together, opposed to just us being out on our own trying to create this. That it requires community to heal. It requires humanity to make the changes on the grander level that contributes to a lot of the issues that are affecting the housing, food insecurity, economic disparity. And we want to create a intentional community that's BIPOC supportive, green, sustainable, zero carbon, regenerative. And we also have a leadership certificate program that, again, draws in these critical resources with hands-on training for social ecopreneurship as a startup community, hybrid, cooperative, and incubator, and then the field studies that contribute to the development of the intentional community. So, really looking at, as you saw for our first slide, let's bring back here, nature and the land, the intersectionality of relationship and community. And I feel that our journey in acquiring land and in the context of land legacy has truly been that. The need to explore the intersectionality and understand that this is not just, oh, we're trying to find land for the Nature Studies Conservatory to really do the core of its programming, but it's really understanding all of the dynamics that contribute to the situations around land. So, as we look at survival and really this whole idea of transgenerational trauma, that's really the base of our work, is addressing transgenerational trauma. And we understand how it ties into oppression. So those who are oppressed and those who are doing the oppression. And this is why we have the Harmony Project to address the general community and all these factors that tie into survival and equity and equality, so that everyone is able to have housing, food, and resource security, which is foundational for life. And so it's going to be very difficult to heal from anything when you don't have this foundation in place. And so historically, land has been a means to security. And just kind of, recap from Europe as history goes, there was a lot of situations that have occurred between disease in the sense of plagues, bubonic plague, scarlet fever, the potato famines, all of these things, nature was also tied in. How could nature allow these things, and so this relationship with nature started becoming interesting because people depended on nature to live and to thrive, but there were also these experiences that were natural experiences. And so with serfdom and land being associated with wealth and access to these basic needs, a lot of people were in situations where they weren't able to do this because of, the whole structure that was in place. And so with the United States being an opportunity, North America, Central South America, these were new opportunities for people to finally have a chance of being out of survival. And so land was available. Again, this connection with a means of security. And by no means it was the magic wand, but also the trials in working with the land, getting things to grow, safety, security, and then the people who were already on the land that had a different relationship, a different connection, and view and experience. And so when we talk about the idea of a community land trust, of decommodifying land, because land was so much the basis of survival, it has really become a commodity. And with that, accessibility has been an issue. And so I'm going to come off of my presentation because I can't see anyone with my screen up. But knowing that there's this connection between nature, healing, and restoring relationship and community. So if you have any questions, you're welcome to share those in the chat. But really, I'm going to delve in a little bit deeper. So my ancestry, I look Black, but I'm also Indigenous. And Indigenous of the people of North America and Africa. And within transgenerational trauma that I've experienced myself and my lineages, I know for me that the land is healing, just the land itself, not because of owning anything, but just being in nature, being able to be in relationship, because nature has a way of teaching relationship. When we have a chance to just sit and be and to go within, it's very healing on so many levels. And so that is why I really focused on this work, is not only healing the transgenerational trauma that I have been exposed to and the people that I work with have been exposed to, but understanding that if that is not healed, it continues to repeat itself. And that trauma is not only enacted on the people, but also the land. There is this relationship that whatever happens to the people affects the land, happens to the land. So there's no way to separate the two. And this is why when I say intersectionality, it's all these different levels. So I wish this was so simple as saying, okay, we just need to get land and we keep moving. But it's all these layers of healing and acknowledgement and responsibility that is beyond the general context of stewardship. That when we talk about accessing land, how can we do that is not placing the land in the context of commodity, understanding that when we say emancipation of people, we also have to emancipate the land. We have to emancipate the land and the people. So within a community land trust, The context of that is that it can't be bought or sold. And it's a way that the people can live on the land without necessarily focusing on how is that land going to be removed from them and affecting their housing, food, and resource security. Now, there's things that need to be put in place in order to really thrive on the land, but I feel that that comes with, as the inner person is healing, the community can heal. And so people are able to work together in relationship with the land. And there begins to be a balancing in how that whole flow is. So some of the challenges that I've had, I had originally wanted a tiny home community where people could literally, we would provide grants for them to be able to buy their own tiny home. And when they were ready to leave our intentional community, they would be able to take their home with them. So they literally would have that security of housing. And here come to find out in Short County, you can have a tiny home, but it needs to be on a permanent foundation. So that put a whole glitch into this well-constructed plan that our board, that our organization had worked on. And so we've now shift gears. RV park. Because there is a community that's further up north that has the permit and the zoning to have a tiny home community. And it is a RV park setup. And we're also looking into how we might be able to get land. How do we get land that can be actually converted to RV park? So that is where we're at now.
We have about 2 more minutes.
Okay.
There's so much good information. I'm so sorry.
No worries. This is where we're at right now with the intentional community. We're still working on for the actual Nature Studies Conservatory space. And we really feel at this point that if we can just have a home setting with several bedrooms and the land to do the micro farming, the greenhouse, the arboretum, the solarium, which would be within the house. People can come and learn how to build relationship with them. So I will wrap up there. And that is our journey. That is our context. That is our experience, my experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Myra. Super unique story, really good, challenging. Yeah. I'll again invite people to put questions in the chat. I have one I'm holding on to that I'm going to pop in there in a minute. Our next speaker is Jean Richardson from Kirkridge Retreat and Study Center in Bangor, Pennsylvania. And I will invite Jean to speak. Jean's one of our steering committee members here at the RCC.
So first, thank you everybody for coming, because this is a really important topic. Thanks, Ben and Justine, for hosting it. And Dr. Myra, thank you for really kind of kicking us off, because one of the things you raised is really the need for land to be returned to some of the common, for everyone to share and enjoy, and the need for this wild space, and the need also for people to have an opportunity to come to our places and take a long, deep breath to remember who they are and from whence they came. So Kirkridge was founded in 1942, and it sits on the Kittatinny Ridge of the Pocono Mountains. It sits right on the Appalachian Trail. It is in the largest forested corridor of Pennsylvania. It is a center for migratory birds and sits on a ridge that changes elevation by about 1,200 feet. So it's the Pennsylvania woodlands, as well as one of the highest peaks in the area. So our journey with putting land in easement started in 2008. And it took 5 years because of all the things that Dr. Myra talked about, which is boards change, people change, government officials change. It just takes a long time to get into an agreement that everybody comes on board. So we started in 2008 and we completed the easement in 2013. One of the reasons that it was critical as for me, the director of Kirkridge at that point, to really work on this is that at one point Kirkridge owned 2,000 acres. And when I came to Kirkridge, it was at 207. And what they had done consistently through the years was to sell land in order to make money in order to pay the bills. And that was consistent. If you read the history, it continues and continues and continues. So I didn't want to see that trend to continue. And I wanted to do something during my tenure to put this land in permanent easement. And when we did that, we provided a continuous watershed from the top of the mountain at what we call Nelson Lodge, all the way down through Cherry Valley to the Delaware River. And that was because various pieces were worked on with the Nature Conservancy to put all of this in easement. So there's a clean watershed now all the way down to the Delaware River, which I'm really proud about. So what was the process? Well, we had to educate ourselves about what's an easement and what would that mean for our property. And there's a variety of easements. You can form them in a variety of ways. But essentially, it's about setting aside your land so that it cannot be privately sold or developed. So Kirkridge still owns the land, but we have sold the rights to develop anything on that land. So no more buildings, no more parking lots, no more anything on the land that we've set aside. It was important to educate ourselves over and over again because boards change every year. So every year you had to keep bringing people on board, and they kind of had to ease into this idea of what it was going to be to let go of land. We had to create the right envelope in our land about what was the land that was valuable to put into easement. What would that shape be? How would that surround our buildings? And try and anticipate all the way down the road, like what was it that we wanted to preserve? And what was it that we wanted to preserve for the common, for all people to be able to enjoy and access? And one of the things that was really critical that we provided was when we put our land in easement, we gave a public access to people wanting to go on the Appalachian Trail that didn't cross a major highway. And that was very important because we live on a highway where people go too fast. And, you know, we have Boy Scout troops and all sorts of family groups, you know, walking across this highway, and to be able to park in our parking lot and get a different access was very valuable and a good service for us to the community. We needed to pay for a survey so that we had the lines and the, you know, accurate accounting, just like a real estate sale. And then one of the things that happened is we had to get the approval of all the government agencies. So we had to work with the township, we had to work with the county, we had to work with the state, because each of those entities is allotted money to put in Pennsylvania. It's money to put land that is wildlands in conservancy or farmlands. And so each of those is a different pocket of money, and that needs to be approved through each level of those politics. let's see, what else I want to tell you. So we had an overseeing agency that helped us work through this, and it was the Nature Conservancy. And if any of you know of the Nature Conservancy, they've now been successful in setting aside 115 million acres. But by now it's more than that. It's probably more like 150 acres and over 5,000 miles of river into conservancy. I think that's really, what I'll say. Putting our land in conservancy, they review the land every year. They make sure that we haven't done anything to violate the terms of agreement. We created those terms of agreement, like what would we allow on our trails and what wouldn't we allow on our trails, what type of access we would allow. It required that we couldn't do any more building or setting aside land. And so we set aside 113 of our 207 acres. And that's probably it. I'll give you, if I stop my video, I'll show you a picture of what some of the lands that we put in conservancy are, all these lands over the hill. So it goes down in there and all the way across that between this side of what you can see in the trees and the far side is the Delaware River. So that's what we were able to put in conservancy, and we're really proud about that decision. We did actually, not everyone is able to do this, but we were actually able to sell the rights for $500,000, and that actually did save our center. And so we did well in the sale. We waited till the first bid we had on that was 110,000, and we waited 4 years and we were able to sell it for over 500,000, the rights to the land, which again, it serves the whole county, it serves the whole region, and it gives access to everyone now on that portion of our land. So I'm happy to answer questions later.
Yeah, and if other folks have been considering putting together an easement or are partway through the process and have specific questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat. I see one there from Gregg. We can come back to those in a minute. Justine, I want to just keep track of time. Is there anything that I need to be aware of, or should we just keep running? Okay, we're going to keep running. Next, I'd like to invite Tom Powell, who's the executive director at Carolyn Furnace in Virginia. Tom's going to speak for a little while here, and he also has slides, and I believe I've made you co-host. Yes, good.
Okay, can everybody see the screen?
I can see the screen. Your audio is a little slow, but I think it'll work.
Okay, so humbled and honored to be part of such a prestigious group, especially following the first two presenters, because we're very interested in both subjects. So this connects really well for us. So this first slide here is a painting by the great-granddaughter of the master of the furnace here, of a man named Joseph Marston Sr. Recreated this in 1996 from an original painting that was done in 1858. So as we're preparing to have some conversations, some difficult conversations about slavery, I'd like to ask you a couple questions about this painting. What does not seem correct in this picture? And just type in the chat of what you see and what pops up. The next question is looking at this picture, which houses do you think slaves lived in? And then just a fact about this property. There were estimated 200 people that lived in the community around the furnace, and it was an iron plantation. And the community had its own church, its own general store, its own small iron making production facility to do wagon parts and things like that. So I'll go to the next slide. So Carolyn Furnace is located in Fort Valley by a ring of mountains known as the Shenandoah Valley. This particular mountain range right here in the middle is Massanutten Mountain. We are in the very southern end of Fort Valley, which is a 25-mile long valley. We are affiliated with the ELCA, which remains the whitest Christian denominations in the U.S., and we are located at the site of a 19th century iron furnace that supported the Confederacy during the Civil War. We neighbor with Shenandoah National Park public lands, which remained segregated until the summer of 1950, just 7 years before Lutherans purchased this land. The first African Americans brought to Shenandoah County as enslaved people during the 18th century. The exact date is not quite known, but we do know that by 1783, there were 362 enslaved people in this county. That number would grow to 2,423, 1820, when 1 in 7 people in this county were enslaved people. These individuals were considered to be property, had no rights, and were viewed as less than human. Almost everyone accepted and participated in this system. Records indicate only a few individuals ever openly opposed slavery in this area. Of the enslaved people are remembered today. They left behind almost no written records. The only physical remainders of their presence are their burial sites and the buildings they were forced to construct for their masters. So Caroline Furnace began in 1836. This furnace ran from October to May every year. Once it was fired, it would run 24 hours a day, and it was fired up to a temperature of 3,000 degrees. The furnace produced up to 3 tons of pig iron per day, using about 200 bushels of charcoal per ton, almost an acre every day, an acre of trees. The highest populations of the enslaved people in Shenandoah County labored in iron production. And they had all sorts of skills, from mining to cutting down the trees, to doing routine hard labor around the furnace. So this is what we look like today. This is our mission, and then down below is my own personal mission statement. We are 257 acres. We are surrounded by national forest east and to the south, which is why we're so interested in the easement opportunities that could come with that. So we do provide opportunities for outdoor experiential education at a very historically and ecologically significant site in the state of Virginia. So Caroline Furnace, as I said, is located at the south end of the Shenandoah County, and we're at the very southern end of Fort Valley. That's 25 miles in length. Yes, Jean. Jean had her finger up. So I just wanted to kind of have the cartoon character, but I wanted to show you where our property really is. This is our lake, and it's on the north end of our property. So if you kind of follow my cursor, and it goes around to a road here, the original retreat, this is our current retreat house, first property ever, first building constructed here on the property. Our cabin village area is here, and we have an all screened in. So this shows you about 2/3 of our property.
Bye, honey. I love you too.
You can see all the way up the north end of the valley. So we're at the southern end. It's 25 miles long. And you see the mountaintops up there. Those of you in the Washington, D.C. area were 90 miles west, and that is Signal Knob Mountain, where Interstate 66 and Interstate 81 meet. So that's kind of where we are, and you can see how we're nestled in this beautiful valley. So how are we relevant, and what's the of me talking about this amongst you today? We, like most of you, are intentionally really looking closely at our values and our principles and what we believe. And I wanted to point out in red what we have recently updated within the last 3 years. We realized, looking really closely, getting all our constituents and alumni, that we needed to add more in there about diversity. So the value of diversity, inclusion, and accessibility, starting in 2019, became a very, very important part of what we value. So did environmental stewardship and sustainability. Not that we haven't been doing this for years, because we have moved 1890 chapel here, a 1790 cabin here. We just didn't have it in our own statement. So I encourage you to look at yourself and see what you're saying about yourself. And then the last one, we put in there what we do. We're very welcoming, and we are a brave space. We're a place where you can be safe and not judged to say and be who God made you to be. So what does all this mean about slavery on our land? First thing that we recommend that we're working on right now is to understand the history of your land. In the background of this slide is the sale document from 1890, where Caroline Furnace had 7,000 acres. So this was post-Civil War, and over 28 buildings still survived at that time in 1870. So this is how you can find out what was on your property, right? Go back and look at real estate sale records, and go back and look at titles, and go to some of your universities. Some of the information that we have received is from UVA historical libraries, from actual Civil War records. So there are a lot of different places you can go, and there are a lot of nonprofits that you can find information about your land from too. Really encourage that you never stop doing the research. It's such a continuous process. You have to be intentional, and it has to start. Ours started with our board of directors, right? And really facing our community and getting them behind all of this research. You got to write it down, and you got to update it continually. And for us, we really started embracing the good, and then figuring out how we can reconcile. You got to tell the story. In 2018, when we discovered that there was a slave grave site that was part of our property, we started deciding that we've got to recognize that, we have to embrace it, and we want to do something about it. It's hard to do with some of the background information I just gave. There are no records. On this next slide, in the background is a letter, and this is a letter written from a slave owner to the master of the furnace here. And it says, "Gentlemen, I received a letter from J.B. Esquire through the request of Ben, informing me that Coss, C-O-S-S, was one of his slaves that was working here during the winter. That he is in a singular way, swelled in the face, arms, legs, and feet, and is not able to put his feet to the ground, and also that he could not consent for a doctor to be called in. If such be the situation of Coss, I wish you to call in a doctor to attend to him. I feel well satisfied that you let him be neglected. I hope that he may recover before this reaches you. Please let me know how he is on the receipt of this. My best respects to you all. Very respectfully, William S. Dulaney." Now, so we have a name. So let's find this family. Let's see if their ancestors are willing to give us the same history we have from the family that ran this place, right? Because we have a rich history of that entire family. But why don't we have that for the people that did most of the work here, and the people that we did not treat correctly? So this is a tough conversation. I get chill bumps discussing it, because there are some things that occurred here that were not good for us as people. But if you don't embrace the bad and do research on it, you'll never find out what really happened, and you'll never be able to fully recognize and claim that tragedy. So we don't, all of this stuff that you can see here, all of these facts on this slide, some of them are assumptions, right? Some of them are facts based on other iron workforces and industry workforces around the state of Virginia. We actually know how many slaves were here, but we know Kaz was here. And if we can find his family, we're making a step in the direction to help reconcile really difficult things that occurred here. So in closing, we began researching our land and the connection to BIPOC. There's a whole nother section I could tell you about Native Americans on this land, right? When they were here 13,000 years ago as part of the Mohawk tribe, Manahoic tribe. This is Pastor Heidi David Young. She works with me, and I didn't even introduce you, sorry. Yeah, so they were part of the whole Monacan tribe that extended from the Chesapeake all the way to the Ohio River. So there's a lot more to embrace, but embrace the good and the bad. We encourage you to research your land and understand the full impact of our relationship with the land over time. So what we've broken our time frames into 4 areas. Prehistoric. How was the land formed as part of the greater creation of Earth itself? We were formed by folds in the land, cyclone plates meeting underground called a cyclonorium. So understand that part. What and then now we're looking specifically at Native American, and then we're looking specifically at the the iron industry era, and we're looking at the current modern era and what we can do. But most of all, go have some unforgettable experiences in God's creation and provide it for all God's people. That's what we encourage. There's probably some questions in the chat. I've just been talking away. I'm trying to be conscious of time here. So,
Thank you, Tom. Let's hold our questions for just a moment longer here because I want to make sure we have time to hear from our last speaker. So write them in the chat if you're holding on to one, or write it down yourself so that we can come back to you. And our last speaker is Gregg from the Watershed Center. Gregg.
Hey, can everyone hear me? Great. I'm going to share my screen and present this. So hi, my name is Gregg Osofsky. It's really an honor to be here. Thank you so much for this space, and also to the presenters. This has all been really informative and in keeping with a lot of the work that we engage with to better understand the history and better shape the future of our land here at Watershed. We're a retreat center for social justice and social movement organizations, founded in 2014. And we host groups throughout the year that are working to build movements within their communities, both local, regional, and national movements. And we opened, and we came to this, we found this land in 2012. And that was the primary aspect of our vision. In a sense, it was a little bit cart before the horse, because we recognize stewardship involves a lot more than just having a business model. There's an economic model. You also, we recognize there was many other components to it that we're sort of figuring out as we go. But just a little bit more context to place us in space. We're about 2 hours north of New York City. We're on the just to the eastern edge of the Hudson River watershed in the Housatonic River watershed, right along the southern Taconic mountain range. This was Mohican land originally, the Mohican territory, so to as they say, and but in honoring of the indigenous history here, we've become been in relationship for many years with the Schaghticoke First Nations, which is a indigenous tribe that formed after colonization and after the original tribes were forcibly removed from the region. Those that remained, those members of the various tribes, came together and formed the Schaghticoke, which means mingling of waters. And since meeting them in 2015, I believe, they've been a real inspiration to us. And in many ways, their name embodies what we also see as the meaning behind Watershed, the coming together of people and ideas to create change and to support each other. A little bit of history about myself. My family moved to this region in 1907. We were Jews in Belarus, and there was land grants made available through the Jewish Ag and Industrial Society. And we're one of 30 Jewish families that landed in the town to the east of Millerton called Sharon, Connecticut. The land there was a little bit rocky, so even though the grant was intended for farming, they couldn't farm there. And they moved, and their kids couldn't go to school there either because they were Jews, and at the time, Jews weren't allowed or welcome in the schools. And so they moved to the town to the south of where we lived called Amenia, where my great-grandmother, Rebecca, and her husband, Nathan, served the Jewish community from New York City by opening up a kosher hotel. Their son, David, my grandfather, was actually quite keen on farming and started Ronnybrook Farm in 1941, which remains a farm today. One of the few remaining farms. This region used to be full of dairy farms as of like 50 years ago. But as is a very common story, perhaps around here, as land prices went up, the incentive to stay in a break-even business and probably a back-breaking business of farming was lost, and most of the farms sold out as weekender wealth from New York City started to dominate the financial and economic currents of this region. And so when we purchased this land in 2014, the goal and the intention remains to remove it from the marketplace. It was a weekender's farm, meaning it was a gentleman's farm. So a local farm would graze their animals here. But as you can see, that has shifted. This is a picture more recent where the farm that now currently uses the land here is a vegetable production farm. That's the intent of my talk today, is to speak specifically to how farming is incorporated into our model here. But just real quickly, as I had mentioned in the beginning, we opened this with an intention to start a retreat center for social justice organizations. But very quickly, it became clear that within our social movements, the desire to be connected to land is strong and very prevalent. And within 5 years, or now 7 years, you can see that the Watershed Center is now surrounded by a bunch of allied projects. I'll be talking about Rocksteady Farm, which is the farm that's on the property here, but we have a Zen monastery to the north, a reparations project to the south called the Wild Seed Community Farm, as well as a queer Jewish chicken farm to the west. And so the desire and the need to really develop a stewardship model to support all of these projects, as well as Watershed in its future, is very prevalent. So when we started, we had a farm partner that was not an aligned project. It was a kind of a standard CSA, community supported agricultural organic farm, but he went out of business within 2 years, and our desire to have an allied farm, a farm that aligned with our principles and our politics, was very strong. And so we supported the development of Rocksteady Farm, which two of the people that worked on the farm formed a worker cooperative, and is now 5 years later a very, is amazingly successful. It made it through some very rough times. It was a very hard process to start a farm, as you all can imagine. And they are a queer-owned and operated farm, serving both our local community and also the community of New York City, especially the LGBTQI community. We supported that effort both through technical support. We helped them secure the financing that they need with working with a partner of ours, that an organization that would use our facility as a worker cooperative development organization called the Working World. They've since changed their national name to Seed Commons. So we connected them with Seed Commons, also we supported them in various ways, through our retreat center, providing food when we can, and supporting them through various, mutual aid. We also recognize the need to adjust how we approached rent. Especially with farms, rent is just something that is not affordable. Now, the rent that we were charging the farm before was on the buildings, and basically to support the ongoing maintenance of the buildings. We took that off so that they could get going. And we basically lowered their rent to simply paying for the improvements that they needed that we were providing the initial financing for. 5 years in essentially it worked. They have made it through a lot of the growing pains that farms go through, both on the financial front, on the relational front, on the organizational development front. They have an incredible crew, and they're up against some of the constraints that the initial formation that the farm established, that we established with the farm, both in terms of space, in terms of housing, and in terms of capital needs. I think that the thing that I'd like to share in terms of what we've learned after 5 years is just how important it is to focus on the relationship if you're entering into a partnership like this. The farm is not technically it is not a project of Watershed. They do have a program that Watershed sponsors as a nonprofit. We're able to fiscally sponsor a project of theirs, but they are an autonomous project. And it's a commercial project, albeit a farming, which is a very modest commercial enterprise, to say the least. It's a lot of work, not a lot of speculative value. It's mostly in the vision and the dreams that they're cultivating. That's the real beauty of it. And so we've done a lot of work on the relationship over the years, and really a lot of that has to do with defining boundaries, having clear boundaries with each other, and what the supports that are in place and how we can develop a collaborative relationship over time. Basically, their model doesn't actually support the food needs of Watershed very much, because they're developing, their crop plan is oriented around a CSA model, which is lots of different varieties throughout the season, to support their many retail customers, essentially. We're just one big wholesale customer, and the things that we need a lot of, garlic, potatoes, onions, they don't even grow because it's not something that fits into their model. They actually contract those products out. And so as we move forward, figuring out how we can support them in potentially serving some of our food needs, and then also their programmatic needs, which are just growing, because the queer community that they serve is just incredibly responsive to what they're providing, which is connection to land. As we all know, that's like just such an essential component of what people need and desire and long for, that are not in connection and relationship with. So that's rock steady. Another farm project that we're in relationship with is called Sweet Freedom Farm. And this is a black lead farm project. Jalal Sabor is the lead farmer. He's wearing the yellow hat to the right of the sign. And what they do here is they actually tap the sugar bush that exists on the property. The elders of our property are about 150 years old, and they're all maple trees. And he taps them every year and it's a part of an abolitionist project to make maple syrup and medicine to bring to families of incarcerated with incarcerated family members and provide CSA shares to those communities as part of also bringing them to the prisons to see their loved ones. So that's another farm project that we support. This is a project that I think we're still learning how to best support their needs because their business model or their model of growth is just still in formation. So what we've done so far is just share and support through labor. But ultimately, this is an incredible educational project, and having a real beautiful sugar shack is something that we're moving in the direction of building within the next year or two. And then lastly, on the farming front, I want to just talk about the bigger picture, which is right now I've talked about these two farm projects, which occupy about 15 acres of a 73-acre property. I've been taking a permaculture design class over the last 6 months in order to develop a stewardship plan for the entire property. Here you're seeing one of the sketches that we've put together for a perennial food forest. But the project will incorporate a number of, or at least the design project will incorporate a number of ideas for how we can bring more of our land into an ecological form of stewardship that is less dependent on big, heavy machinery for mowing hay, which about 15 acres of our property is mowed for hay, which is needed and important. But also causes erosion and requires amendments to be brought in. And we've shifted those to organic amendments at the very least. But we're hoping that we could develop a plan, or we are developing a plan that brings more of our land into an ecological form of stewardship. And in many ways, the most important aspect of this is making the land more accessible to our guests. Right now, it's a beautiful property. It's got a lovely lawn. It's got a beautiful walk out to an incredible lake. We have a gorgeous hike up a creek that's very accessible within 2 minutes of all the houses. But there isn't like a narrative to support what we're doing. And the people one of the things that we find is that people, and this is from our own experience as well, being in social movements for many years, is the desire and the need to have things that inspire us to see how change can take shape and actually replace the ways of being that are so destructive that we've inherited. And so developing more accessible ways for people to engage with plants and ideally with animals is something that we think is really important, and to have that be part of an overall regenerative agricultural model that is actually sequestering carbon rather than burning it is kind of the dream that I would love for us to move into, so that we can be a model and inspiration for all those that come through our gates. Well, our gates, we don't even have a gate, our doors, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, that's Watershed and the various ways in which we're engaging with agriculture and farming practices to support the stewardship of our land.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gregg. Thank you for those great images too. So thank you to all of our speakers who took some time out of their busy lives to prepare those presentations for us for the betterment of this community. I am a little overwhelmed and charged up by what I just heard. I want to make sure that we have some time to not only connect with the speakers here and get some questions answered, but also to connect with each other and kind of let some of that charge off and see if we're in the same space together and what we're thinking and how we're reacting to some of these ideas. So I wanted to do a Q&A for a short period here, maybe 15 minutes at most, and then maybe 5 to 8 minutes just breaking off into pairs, something like that, where we can chat with each other and see if we're hearing different things and learn from each other. So that's been a lot of talking heads going with a lot of information. I also wanted to suggest that perhaps if we have really detailed questions about a specific aspect of someone's project or program, that we could set up like an email exchange or something and keep these questions more to the kind of the general things that'll apply to all of us. Otherwise we could derail a little bit here. But all that being said, we have a lot of questions in the chat. And so maybe we want to scroll back, and if there's a question that you'd still like to lift up, let's jump into those and just kind of have an open panel here where we can call out on whoever we'd like to, or call in on whoever we'd like to ask a question.
And I see Myra's hand up, raised hand, and I also recorded the question so I can revisit that as well. But Myra, before you ask your question, let's all just take a deep collective sigh, a breath in and a breath out at your own pace. Just hold that we learned a lot. Thank you, everyone. Myra?
I'd like to thank all of the speakers. Thank you so much for your time and your really all delving deep to contribute to healing and your work with the land. My question actually is to Tom. And I'm just curious, as you were doing research, we know that, you know, this whole context of land in regards to where people were enslaved on the land. And we know that that enslavement were African descendants, the indigenous people of the land that we're on, as well as indentured people as well from Europe. I wanted to find out, in particularly in regards to, we know about Black slavery, but we also know about Black communities were able to come together and get land, and actually was able to allow that land to contribute to their security. And then there were situations where we know with the USDA, there were practices that actually took some of that land back from Black farmers, and then some of the Black communities that were burned down. Did you also find within particularly your local area, and maybe in other areas of the country, information about the Black communities or predominantly Black communities that were also flooded and now are currently lakes?
Wow, that's a loaded question. Thank you, Dr. Miller. But so for us, what's really about where we are geographically, because we valley in the valley, and we're on the very southern end of one county, we are almost a separate community. The other problem with the farming part of this land, so much limestone and riverstone, the way it was formed, in our part of the valley, farming really didn't occur here. The indigenous people mainly came here and hunted and fished, and then they would go back into the Shenandoah Valley to farm. So any of that all is related. The numbers that I was reading you are all specifically from the county and the farming land to our west in the very vast, rich farming land of the Shenandoah Valley. So unfortunately, within this little valley, the very first European here, his last name is my last name. No relation that I know of. But that was in the late 1700s. So those are really the first European people that were here. We having a hard time finding more information about anything in this particular land. So we're trying to use the counties around us and information that they have in order to be able to find out more about what might have happened here. And as I was saying, the biggest historical records we have is from the family of the master of the furnace here, because they really embraced their history and done a lot of research and provided it to us. So we're kind of using that as our springboard to find out more. There are some really good organizations and nonprofits within the county that might be able to help us to answer some of those questions. We're connected through some of the churches with, there is a big project for an African-American cemetery that was part of the farming land in the county, not 20 miles from us. So that's part of the research to do. There is only 3 of us that are full-time here. We're a very small retreat center in camp. Heidi's part-time. She's a 4th person, and we have 1 seasonal director of food service. So we're doing this with volunteers and a few of us keeping it moving. But thank you for those questions, because I will definitely continue to try to find those answers.
Thanks, Tom. Myra, I think you raise a good question for all of us in our journey to understand the land. As you said, the people in the land cannot be separated. So knowing the history of land and people, the entire community as we heal that. I hear that question and thinking about Kirkridge and what history research we have to do as well. Thank you for that. Christina, I saw you put a question in chat. Would you, I don't know where she went, would you like me to read it about the language we use to move ourselves from ownership language to a commons language? And I think that question is open for anyone who would like to respond.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead. Someone else go ahead.
Let me just add to the question as written. I imagine that some, if not all of you, have read Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Kim, the botanist and indigenous raised. And the book is a marvelous collection of stories of how to reconcile both her native teachings and upbringings and her love of science and botany and plants. And I heard her speak one day and in her native language. And she spoke to us about the challenge of language. And that in the English language, we not only have he and she, we have it. And she challenged us to eliminate talking about nature as it, which is this inanimate culture. And when I do, that sounds often quite awkward in the English language. And so she's been an incredible teacher for me. And in our own work around land in the commons, I've been paying attention to how I can say our land or our property and subjectify it. And I'm just wondering how you all might consider that as part of your own unfolding, and how we can begin to collectively change just the subtlety of ownership to a living organism and ecology like land and all her members. Thank you.
So we are running our summer camp right now, and children and minors will ask you all sorts of questions. And I often get asked do you own all of this land? And my first response is, I am a steward of this land. Our board of directors, we're a nonprofit, own this land, but do we really? So it's a very interesting question. I love it, and I would embrace some common language because, you know, we have a responsibility to educate about what ownership of land really means, you know, as part of the statement. And I would love a better response to tell some of these young adults and some of our constituents, because really I'm a steward of God's ministry here, but in the nature. Anyway, that's my thought.
I'm in agreement because when we talk about stewardship, you know, we like to think of it in the sense that when we say ownership, it's the collective, or excuse me, when we say or, are. When we say are, it's this collective and connection and relationship, but unfortunately, historically, are has been ownership. And this is kind of contributing to this whole cyclic pattern that there are people who are thinking collective with our, and there are people who are thinking ownership with our.
Definitely hear that. And I was noticing myself hearing ownership, not collective. Really interesting that some people are meaning collective when they say that. Yeah. Shall we move into some? Yeah, we just have a few minutes, and if you'd like, I'd like to encourage you to have a few conversations here. So I'm going to do some breakout rooms just for 6 minutes, 7
I think
minutes.
that question leads us into a good space to think about what do we do after this call? Clearly 90 minutes isn't enough for the big questions nor the little logistical questions. So I think Ben is going to break us off into pairs just for maybe 8 minutes. So we can come see how that landed on our bodies. That's our invitation, not only in our heads, but how did that land on our hearts? We'll come back, and when we come back, we'll talk about what does this look like next for the Retreat Center collaboration.
All right, here we go.